Lila clutched her mother Rachel's hand tightly as they approached the grand courthouse in the small town of Willow Creek. The building loomed over them with its towering pillars and etched stone facade, a structure that seemed to carry centuries of stern authority within its walls. Rachel tried to steady her own nerves, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, while keeping a comforting hand on Lila's shoulder. The little girl's other hand gripped a small stuffed rabbit, worn at the ears and faded from countless hugs. Her wide brown eyes darted nervously between the polished wooden doors, the marble floors inside, and the black-suited figures bustling through the hallways. Every step seemed amplified in the echoing space, and Lila's small feet shuffled anxiously. The morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting patterns on the marble that danced like ghosts across the courtroom floor. Lila paused at one such pattern, bending down to touch it with a tiny finger, and Rachel gently coaxed her forward. "Come on, baby. We need to be on time," she whispered, her voice low and reassuring, yet tinged with her own worry. They were here for the custody hearing, a decision that would determine the future of their lives in ways Rachel couldn't yet fully comprehend. She had spent sleepless nights preparing, gathering documents, writing letters, and making lists of every milestone, every bedtime story, every scraped knee she had ever comforted her daughter through. Every detail mattered, but nothing could have prepared her for the mix of anxiety and hope that churned in her chest as she entered the courthouse. Inside, the air smelled of polished wood, waxed floors, and the faint scent of ink and paper. The chatter of lawyers, clerks, and spectators reverberated softly, interspersed with the occasional shuffle of papers or tap of heels. Lila's eyes widened further, absorbing every movement, every sound. The scale of the room was overwhelming to someone her size, yet her gaze soon fell on a figure that seemed different from the rest. Sitting quietly near the entrance was a police dog, a German shepherd named Max, his sleek fur gleaming in the sunlight streaming through the windows. He was alert yet calm, his head held high, ears twitching at the faintest sound. Despite his size and the visible strength in his muscles, there was a gentleness in his posture that drew Lila in instantly. "Doggy," she murmured, almost under her breath, pointing a tiny finger. Her voice carried across the room just enough to make Rachel glance down. The little girl's lips trembled slightly, a mixture of fear and curiosity. Rachel felt a pang of relief. Amidst all the tension, Lila had found something familiar, something comforting. She knelt down to her daughter's level, whispering softly, "Yes, honey. That's Max. He's here to keep everyone safe." Max's eyes flicked toward them, and for a moment, the courtroom seemed to hold its breath. The dog's trained instincts picked up on Lila's subtle emotional cues, her anxiety, her sadness, her trembling fingers clutching the stuffed rabbit. He lowered his head slightly, inching closer, as if to silently offer comfort. Lila, unaware of the many eyes now on her, took a cautious step forward. "Doggy sad?" she whispered. The room went quiet. Lawyers paused mid-step, the judge's gavel remained untouched, and the officers shifted uneasily, sensing something unusual. Rachel froze, unsure whether she should scold her daughter for speaking out or marvel at the insight she had just expressed. Her chest tightened as she realized the words were not random. Max reacted subtly, his ears tilting forward, his tail wagging just enough to signal awareness without disturbing protocol. Judge Margaret Ellis, a stern woman with silver hair and sharp eyes, leaned forward slightly in her seat, her attention captured by the tiny girl's words. She motioned for quiet and asked, "Excuse me, what did you say?" Lila's words were barely audible, but they carried an unexpected weight in the hushed courtroom. Rachel, cheeks flushed, whispered, She said the dog's sad, Your Honor." Max's calm presence seemed to fill the courtroom with an inexplicable energy. The officer shifted, recognizing the rare, almost human-like sensitivity of the dog. The murmurs among the spectators grew quieter as curiosity replaced chatter. Lila's small voice, so honest and pure, had done what no argument or document could. It drew the attention of everyone in the room. For a few fleeting seconds, the courtroom was not a place of procedure, rules, or arguments. It was a room suspended in a delicate balance of innocence and empathy. Rachel knelt beside Lila, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead and smoothing the wrinkles in her dress. "Baby," she whispered, "Max is just a dog. He's here to help keep people safe. Nothing to worry about." But Rachel's words did little to mask the intensity of the moment. She felt the raw vulnerability in her daughter, the kind of vulnerability that no amount of preparation or planning could shield. Lila's gaze remained locked on Max, who lowered his massive head closer to the little girl's level, his eyes soft, almost mournful. An officer, standing nearby, quietly informed Judge Ellis, "Your Honor, the child has recently experienced trauma. Her father, he passed away unexpectedly." The judge's eyebrows lifted, and she nodded slowly, absorbing the context. The courtroom, once bustling with efficiency and procedure, began to shift in tone. Everyone sensed the gravity of the moment, not a legal matter, but a human one. Lila's tiny fingers brushed the fur and Max's chest. A soft, almost inaudible whine escaped the dog, as though he recognized the depth of the little girl's grief. She giggled softly, a sound both fragile and comforting, and whispered again, "Doggy sad?" This time, it sounded less like observation and more like connection, a word carrying the weight of loss, loneliness, and the yearning for comfort. Rachel's eyes welled with tears, and she clutched Lila tighter, whispering, "It's okay, baby. He's here with you. You're safe." Around them, lawyers shifted uncomfortably, unsure how to respond. Courtrooms were places of rules, evidence, and decisions, not moments of profound human connection between a child and a dog. And yet, here it was, unfolding silently but powerfully. Max lay down gently, allowing Lila to approach fully. She touched his ears, feeling the warmth of his body, and her tension seemed to melt. The officer beside Max relaxed slightly, noting how expertly the dog had sensed the child's emotional state. It was a rare display of intuition and empathy, qualities often invisible to the human eye in the midst of legal proceedings. Judge Ellis adjusted her glasses, observing quietly. She could see the shift in the room. A courtroom meant for logic and protocol had transformed into something profoundly human. Lila's innocent recognition of sadness in Max had altered the dynamic, reminding every adult present that law and justice, while necessary, were incomplete without empathy and understanding. Rachel glanced around the courtroom, noticing even the most serious faces softened by the little girl's presence. Lawyers paused in their notes, spectators leaned forward in curiosity, and security officers remained still, giving space to the unfolding moment. Lila's gaze never left Max, and Max's watchful eyes never left her. In that instant, a bridge formed a silent, unspoken bond between innocence and experience, grief and comfort, child and dog. The courthouse, a place usually dominated by seriousness and formality, held its breath. And for a fleeting but unforgettable moment, Lila, a 3-year-old girl, and Max, a police dog, reminded everyone present that even in the gravest of places, empathy and connection could shine through in the simplest, most unassuming ways. The courtroom seemed to pause, as if it too were holding its breath, watching the small girl and the enormous German shepherd. Max's ears twitched, his dark eyes never leaving Lila. The contrast was striking, a creature trained for security and protection, yet gentle enough to sense a child's fragile emotions. Lila took a tentative step closer, her tiny fingers brushing against Max's warm fur. she whispered again, almost shyly, "Doggy sad?" The words carried innocence and perception, far beyond her 3 years, resonating with every adult in the room. Rachel's heart clenched. She had never heard her daughter speak so plainly about the weight of grief. Her husband's sudden death had left a void in both their lives, one that Rachel tried to fill with bedtime stories, warm hugs, and endless reassurances. But Lila's mind, young and unguarded, still felt the emptiness acutely. The words "doggy sad" weren't just observation, they were empathy, an instinctive recognition of sorrow in another being. Rachel struggled to swallow her own emotions, knowing the entire courtroom had just witnessed a moment of profound clarity. Judge Ellis leaned forward, her steely expression softened by curiosity and concern. She was a woman accustomed to evaluating facts, weighing evidence, and delivering judgment without sentiment interfering with procedure. Yet here, in the quiet hum of the courthouse, she found herself captivated by the tiny girl's words and the dog's measured response. "Excuse me," she said, her voice gentle but commanding attention. "What did you say, little one?" Rachel knelt beside Lila, careful not to overwhelm her, whispering softly, "She means she's noticing Max feels sad, Your Honor." The judge nodded slowly, her gaze shifting to Max. The German shepherd remained still, yet there was a subtle movement of his shoulders, a quiet lowering of his head as if acknowledging the child's empathy. The courtroom had grown utterly silent. Lawyers, deputies, and spectators all watched the unfolding scene with rapt attention, some shifting uncomfortably in their seats, unsure how to react to something so intangible. An officer leaned toward Judge Ellis and whispered, "Your Honor, the child recently lost her father. She's been through a lot." Her awareness of Max's demeanor is a response to her own emotions. The judge's lips pressed into a thin line. She glanced back at Rachel and Lila, noticing the little girl's tight grip on her mother's hand. The connection between Lila and Max was undeniable, but it was something more than comfort. It was an instinctive, almost mystical understanding of shared sadness. Lila's tiny voice carried again, barely a whisper, but impossible to ignore. "Doggy sad?" she repeated, her brown eyes glistening as she looked up at Max. Her words were simple, but they pierced the courtroom with raw honesty. Even the hardened attorneys, used to logic and argument, felt the unexpected weight of the child's insight. One older lawyer rubbed his temple, thinking about his own children, remembering moments of unspoken grief. For a moment, everyone recognized that grief did not always need to be spoken. It could be felt, witnessed, and shared, even across species. Rachel brushed Lila's hair behind her ears, her hands trembling slightly. "It's okay, baby," she whispered. "Max is here to help. You're safe." The reassurance was gentle, yet it did little to calm the child's racing emotions. Lila's gaze never wavered from Max, who now lowered his massive head closer to the floor, allowing the little girl to feel his warmth. The officers nearby shifted to make space, silently acknowledging the unspoken bond forming. The room was no longer just a courtroom. It was a shared space of understanding and empathy, where formal roles gave way to the human need for comfort. A clerk whispered to the judge, explaining Lila's recent struggles, including sleepless nights and anxious behaviors following her father's death. Judge Ellis nodded thoughtfully. The gravity of the child's trauma became clearer with every passing second. Here was a family navigating loss, a little girl processing grief in the only way she knew, and a dog offering a silent lifeline. Max's training had prepared him for danger, not heartbreak, yet he seemed to instinctively understand the delicate balance of his new role. The courtroom remained still, yet the atmosphere had subtly shifted. Lawyers began to whisper amongst themselves, adjusting their strategies unconsciously, realizing that this case was not just about custody, it was about emotional stability. about understanding a child's world beyond legal definitions. Witnesses leaned forward, captivated by the simplicity yet profundity of Lila's insight. Even the deputies who had spent years in tense, high-stakes situations found themselves quietly moved. Lila stepped forward cautiously, reaching out her tiny hand to touch Max's fur. The German shepherd allowed her to do so, nudging her gently with his nose, a gesture that felt like reassurance. "See, baby?" Rachel whispered softly. "He's here for you. He knows." The little girl's lips curled into a faint smile, her fingers brushing along the warmth of Max's coat. A small, almost imperceptible sigh escaped her, a release of tension accumulated over months of fear, confusion, and sadness. Judge Ellis watched closely, silently noting how Lila's interaction with Max seemed to anchor her. The courtroom, usually filled with rigid procedure, had become an arena of observation, reflection, and shared human experience. Lila's instinctive recognition of sadness in Max mirrored her own, creating a resonance that touched every person present. The judge, experienced and unflinching in the face of evidence and testimony, allowed herself a brief moment of reflection. Perhaps justice was not only about legality, it was about understanding the hearts of those involved, especially the youngest and most vulnerable. Rachel's own chest tightened as she observed the delicate scene. She had feared the courtroom's harshness, worried that her daughter's innocence would be swallowed by rules and arguments. Instead, Lila had carved out a small, sacred space in the midst of tension, a space where grief could exist, where empathy mattered, where even a child's simple words could silence a room. She whispered quietly to Max, "Thank you," and the dog's ears twitched in acknowledgement. A photographer discreetly noted the scene, capturing a rare moment of genuine human connection for the courthouse records. It wasn't about publicity or spectacle. It was about the unexpected ways empathy manifests, especially when filtered through innocence. Lawyers returned to their seats, glancing at one another with unspoken acknowledgement. The courtroom had been transformed by something intangible, a child's pure perception and a dog's silent wisdom. Lila continued to stroke Max's fur, murmuring softly, her voice almost melodic in its simplicity. The German shepherd rested patiently, a silent guardian, understanding without words. Rachel watched her daughter relax for the first time that day, noticing the way her small shoulders seemed to release tension she hadn't realized she was holding. The courtroom, once filled with whispers, shuffles, and rigid routines, now hummed with quiet reflection. Each person present recognized the subtle miracle unfolding: a 3-year-old girl, a police dog, and the shared human need for comfort and connection. Even Judge Ellis, stern and precise, allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible smile. Justice, she realized, required more than rules and precedent. It required understanding, empathy, and the ability to see the unseen wounds carried by those who could not yet articulate them fully. Max had done what no document, no testimony, no legal argument could do. He had bridged the gap between grief and solace, law and humanity. Rachel held Lila close, feeling her daughter's heartbeat slow as the comfort of Max's presence settled over her. For the first time that day, fear and anxiety were replaced by a tentative sense of peace. Lila whispered once more, "Doggy sad." "Okay," her voice carrying quiet acceptance. The adults in the room, too, felt a sense of awe, realizing that, in this space, an unexpected bond had taken root, a bond that would quietly influence the course of the day's proceedings and leave an indelible mark on everyone present. Judge Margaret Ellis leaned back slightly in her chair, eyes narrowing thoughtfully as she observed the small girl's interaction with Max, the police dog. Lila, barely 3, had already captivated the courtroom with her innocence and raw empathy. The judge had seen countless children in her courtroom over the years, but rarely had she witnessed one so attuned to emotion, both her own and that of others. Max's gentle presence seemed to draw Lila out of her shell, transforming her anxious energy into quiet curiosity. It was extraordinary, almost miraculous, how the child's words, "Doggy sad," had silenced the room and shifted its attention entirely. Rachel knelt beside her daughter, brushing back soft brown curls from Lila's forehead. Her own heart raced as she tried to gauge the judge's reaction. The weight of months of grief, sleepless nights, and relentless worry pressed down on her shoulders. She had feared this day for weeks, worried that the courtroom's rigid procedures and the opposing attorney's sharp questions would overwhelm her little girl. But in this unexpected moment, something profound had happened. Lila's grief, expressed simply and instinctively, had opened a window into the human heart. "Miss Harper," Judge Ellis began, her voice calm yet firm, "can you tell me more about what your daughter meant by that?" Rachel swallowed hard, her throat tight. She took a deep breath before answering, her voice shaking slightly. "Your Honor, my husband passed away suddenly 6 months ago. Lila is still very young, and she doesn't fully understand everything. She doesn't know how to process her feelings, but she sees emotions in others, even animals." When she said "Doggy sad," she was noticing Max's calm, serious presence, sensing something familiar in him. The sadness, the understanding. She knows grief, and she knows when someone else understands it too. The courtroom remained silent, the usual shuffles of papers and murmurs of conversation completely halted. Judge Ellis nodded slowly, absorbing the explanation. She could feel the weight of the child's perspective, a perspective often ignored in legal proceedings, yet critical to understanding the impact of decisions on a young life. Max, sensing the focus on the child, shifted slightly, his massive head lowering closer to Lila's. His dark eyes, intelligent and compassionate, locked on hers as if affirming her insight. A court-appointed child psychologist quietly entered, taking a seat in the back of the courtroom. She observed without interrupting, allowing the interaction between child and dog to unfold naturally. Her trained eyes picked up on subtle body language, Lila's relaxed posture near Max, the way her small fingers stroked his fur, the calm sigh she released when his warmth met her hand. The psychologist's notes would later explain that children often project their feelings onto animals, forming profound emotional bonds that aid in processing trauma. In this moment, Lila's connection with Max exemplified the healing power of empathy and nonverbal communication. Rachel's eyes welled with tears, but she tried to compose herself. Her daughter's innocence had illuminated the truth of their situation in a way no legal argument could. Every hard document, every precedent cited by attorneys, suddenly felt secondary to the simple, powerful reality of a grieving child seeking comfort. Max's presence had created a safe, almost sacred space in the courtroom, a space where Lila could exist as herself, not merely as a subject of legal scrutiny. Judge Ellis cleared her throat, her tone shifting from curiosity to reflection. "It seems clear," she said carefully, "that this child is experiencing a depth of emotion that requires understanding beyond what the law typically accounts for. We must consider her emotional well-being as seriously as any legal argument presented today." The statement caused a ripple through the room. Attorneys straightened, some exchanging brief glances as they absorbed the subtle but undeniable shift in courtroom dynamics. The judge's words signaled a recognition that compassion, empathy, and human connection were integral to the proceedings at hand. Lila, sensing the attention on her, let go of Rachel's hand for a moment and reached out to Max. The dog responded instantly, nudging her gently with his nose, a silent affirmation of their bond. The moment was small yet monumental. In an environment dominated by rules, authority, and protocol, a child had created a moment of pure humanity, a pause that reminded everyone present of the stakes. beyond legalities, the emotional health of the youngest and most vulnerable. Rachel whispered softly to her daughter, "It's okay, baby. You're safe. He's here with you." Lila's lips curved into a faint, serene smile. She pressed closer to Max, resting her cheek briefly against his fur. The warmth of his body, the rhythmic rise and fall of his chest, offered a comfort that transcended words. Even the stern officers, whose days were often filled with tension and stress, felt the unexpected pull of this fragile scene. The child psychologist raised a hand slightly, indicating to Judge Ellis that she wished to speak. With a nod, the judge allowed her to approach. "Your Honor," the psychologist said quietly, "children at Lila's age process trauma through observation and interaction. She has not only recognized sadness in Max, but she has also found a non-judgmental source of comfort. This is significant. It is rare for a child to demonstrate such insight, and it speaks to her capacity for empathy and emotional understanding." Rachel exhaled slowly, a mixture of relief and awe washing over her. The courtroom had transformed from a place of tension and anxiety into a place of reflection and quiet observation. Lila, sensing the approval of the adults around her, hugged Max gently, whispering once more, "Doggy sad? Okay?" The simplicity of her words belied the depth of understanding they conveyed. Max rested his head on the floor, close enough for Lila to feel his warmth and security, silently affirming the bond that had formed between them. Judge Ellis returned to her bench, her gaze soft but deliberate. She looked at the adults in the room and spoke with a tone that carried both authority and compassion. "It is evident that the emotional needs of this child must guide our considerations today. Lila's well-being is paramount, and we must ensure that every decision takes into account not only legal precedent, but also the human heart." The courtroom, which had once been filled with procedural focus, now resonated with empathy. Even the opposing attorney, who had entered the courtroom ready to challenge every assertion and scrutinize every claim, found himself silent. Weight of the moment was undeniable, and his usual arguments seemed hollow in the presence of such profound vulnerability. Lila's gaze remained fixed on Max, her tiny hand resting lightly on his fur. The dog, trained for security and obedience, had become her anchor, a silent witness to her grief and resilience. Rachel felt a wave of gratitude and relief, knowing that her daughter's innocence had opened a door that legal documents could not. For months, she had feared this day, worrying that Lila's small size and tender heart would be lost in the courtroom's machinery. Instead, her daughter had become the center of attention, not for misbehavior or fear, but for the wisdom of her emotions and the depth of her empathy. The atmosphere in the courtroom shifted subtly, but irrevocably. Lila's connection with Max had reminded everyone present that justice was not merely about rules and evidence. It was about understanding, empathy, and the ability to perceive the unspoken needs of those affected. Rachel squeezed her daughter's hand, whispering softly, "You're doing so well, baby." Lila leaned closer to Max, her small frame relaxing as the warmth of the dog's presence enveloped her. Judge Ellis observed quietly, making mental notes for the proceedings to follow. She knew the courtroom had witnessed something extraordinary, an intersection of innocence, grief, and compassion that could not be ignored. The child's words, the dog's silent empathy, and the mother's unwavering love had created a new lens through which the day's legal proceedings would be viewed. For the first time, law and humanity were not opposing forces. They were intertwined, guiding decisions in a profoundly meaningful way. As Lila stroked Max's fur and whispered softly, Rachel felt tears streaming down her face. She had feared this day, but in this moment, she recognized that her daughter's vulnerability was also her strength. Lila's simple, heartfelt observation had shifted the room's energy, opening hearts and minds to the emotional truth behind every legal argument. Max remained still, his large eyes gentle, sensing the fragility and resilience of the small child he had come to protect. The courtroom, once dominated by tension, protocol, and authority, now held its breath in quiet awe. Lila had transformed it with nothing more than honesty, empathy, and courage. Max's silent, steadfast presence had amplified that transformation, demonstrating the quiet power of connection. For everyone present, this moment would be remembered, not as a procedural detail, but as a testament to the resilience of the human heart, the bond between child and animal, and the profound simplicity of shared understanding. The courtroom had settled into an unusual calm. Lawyers and deputies alike whispered in subdued tones, acknowledging that something extraordinary was unfolding before them. Lila, her small hand still brushing Max's warm fur, seemed to radiate a quiet confidence. The tension of the legal proceedings had softened, replaced by a fragile but undeniable sense of understanding. Even the judge's normally unflinching gaze softened as she observed the child's interaction with the police dog, sensing the profound impact it had on everyone in the room. The door at the back of the courtroom opened quietly, and a woman in a professional, yet understated outfit entered. She carried a leather-bound clipboard, her expression gentle but observant. This was Dr. Emily Sanders, a child psychologist appointed by the court to assess Lila's emotional state. She moved quietly to an empty seat, observing without drawing attention to herself. Her eyes tracked every subtle motion, the small girl's fingers stroking Max's fur, the gentle tilt of the dog's ears. The way Lila's wide brown eyes darted up at the adults nearby and back to her furry companion. Dr. Sanders had seen hundreds of children in her career, many grappling with grief and trauma. She had witnessed fear, sadness, and anxiety expressed in myriad ways. But rarely had she observed something so profound yet subtle. A 3-year-old girl intuitively connecting with an animal to process her own emotions. She made quick, careful notes on her clipboard, aware that these observations might inform the court's decisions later. Lila's ability to read Max, to perceive his calm presence as an emotional mirror, spoke volumes about her intelligence and emotional awareness. Rachel watched the psychologist from her side, feeling a mix of apprehension and hope. She had spent months worrying that Lila's youth would make it impossible for her feelings to be fully understood in the formal environment of the courtroom. Yet here was a trained professional, witnessing firsthand the child's delicate, instinctive coping mechanisms. Max, lying patiently at Lila's feet, seemed almost to sense the psychologist's presence as well, keeping his posture relaxed but alert. Judge Ellis cleared her throat, calling the court to attention. Dr. Sanders, would you please share your observations regarding the child? The psychologist stood, moving a few steps forward while keeping her voice soft and measured. Your Honor, she began. Children at Lila's age often express trauma and grief non-verbally. They may use play, gestures, or interactions with animals to process emotions they cannot yet articulate. In this instance, Lila has demonstrated a remarkable ability to recognize emotion in another being Max, the police dog. Her interaction with him provides her with comfort, security, and a sense of understanding that is vital to her emotional development. Rachel exhaled softly, relief washing over her. She knew Lila had experienced significant fear and confusion following her father's death, but she had not realized the depth of her daughter's emotional insight. Lila's words, simple yet profound, had already moved the courtroom once, and now they were being validated by a professional. She squeezed her daughter's hand gently, whispering, "See, baby? They understand you." Lila's small smile in response was tentative, but it carried the warmth of reassurance. Dr. Sanders continued, her gaze shifting briefly to Max. The dog's presence here is more than security. Max provides a non-judgmental, stable figure for Lila. Animals can act as emotional mirrors, helping children understand and regulate their feelings. Lila's ability to identify sadness, respond with empathy, and seek comfort from Max indicates a level of emotional intelligence that is rare in children her age. This connection should be considered when evaluating her overall well-being. The courtroom absorbed her words in silence. Attorneys, once focused solely on legal strategy, now exchanged subtle nods, recognizing the significance of the child's emotional state in the case at hand. Deputies leaned slightly against the walls, adjusting their stances, as though acknowledging the profound shift in the room's energy. Even Max seemed to sense the importance of the psychologist's observation, lifting his head slightly and meeting Lila's gaze with understanding. Rachel's chest tightened with gratitude. She had feared that the cold, procedural world of the courtroom would overshadow her daughter's grief, reducing her struggles to statistics and testimony. Instead, Lila's presence, amplified by Max's calm and empathetic demeanor, had transformed the environment. The courtroom had become a space where emotion mattered, where understanding could influence decisions, and where a child's needs could no longer be ignored. Lila, sensing the adult's focus, leaned closer to Max, her tiny hands running gently along his back. She whispered, "Doggy." "Okay." The words, simple yet poignant, carried layers of meaning. Recognition, relief, trust. Max lowered his massive head closer to her, as if to say, "I understand. I am here." The moment was fleeting, yet its resonance lingered, touching every soul present in the room. Judge Ellis cleared her throat again, her tone gentle but firm. "Dr. Sanders, based on your observations, do you recommend any immediate steps to support the child during these proceedings?" The psychologist nodded thoughtfully. "Yes, Your Honor. Lila benefits significantly from the presence of a calm, familiar figure. While Max's presence may not be permanent, it illustrates the importance of emotional anchors for her. I recommend considering her comfort and support systems as a central factor in today's proceedings. Additionally, structured opportunities for her to express her emotions should be integrated into the process whenever possible." The judge nodded slowly, making notes on her legal pad. She understood the weight of the recommendation. In her decades on the bench, she had rarely seen a case where the emotional well-being of a child so clearly intersected with legal decision-making. The little girl's reliance on Max underscored the importance of compassion alongside justice. Rachel whispered softly to her daughter, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "See, baby? You're teaching them how important your feelings are." Lila's eyes flickered toward her mother, then back to Max, who remained still, a silent guardian. The dog's calm presence seemed to envelop Lila, steadying her small frame and giving her confidence she had not yet felt in the courthouse's intimidating environment. As the psychologist returned to her seat, Lila allowed herself a deeper breath. She had discovered a rhythm of trust, an understanding that, despite the unfamiliar surroundings, she was safe. Max remained beside her, ears flicking at the slightest sound, yet his body relaxed enough to encourage Lila's comfort. Rachel felt tears pricking at her eyes, a mixture of relief and awe. Her daughter had navigated a difficult world with courage and clarity, aided by the silent wisdom of a dog who had chosen her as much as she had chosen him. The courtroom, once dominated by tension and procedural focus, now hummed with quiet observation. Lawyers returned to their seats, but their notes and arguments seemed secondary to the human truth displayed before them. Deputies adjusted their stances, aware that the day had shifted from a routine hearing to a remarkable testament to empathy, resilience, and the subtle power of non-verbal communication. Judge Ellis finally spoke, her tone deliberate and compassionate. "It is clear that the child's emotional needs must guide our considerations today. This court will take into account not only legal precedent, but the well-being of Lila Harper. We are reminded that law, while necessary, must always be tempered with understanding and care for those affected most profoundly by our decisions. Rachel squeezed Lila's hand once more, whispering a soft, "Thank you" to the little girl for showing such courage. Lila smiled faintly, pressing a tiny kiss to Max's fur, as if acknowledging the dog's role in guiding her through the room's intensity. The officers nearby exhaled quietly, impressed by the bond they had witnessed and the subtle but undeniable shift in the room's energy. Even the reporters, who had been watching from the back, lowered their cameras, sensing that this moment transcended words and images. It was not a spectacle. It was a demonstration of humanity at its most genuine. A child, a dog, and the acknowledgement of grief, empathy, and resilience that could not be captured by law alone. Rachel whispered once more to her daughter, "You've done wonderfully, baby." Lila leaned back slightly, still holding Max's paw in her small hands, her gaze serene. In that quiet connection, she had found a measure of peace. Max remained her steadfast companion, his calm presence a silent promise of protection and understanding. The courtroom, which had begun the day steeped in procedure, tension, and expectation, had been transformed by a child's simple insight and a dog's unwavering empathy. Lila Harper and Max, the police dog, had created a moment that would be remembered long after the hearing, concluded a testament to the profound power of connection, compassion, and understanding in the midst of life's most challenging circumstances. The courtroom had fallen into a rare, almost fragile calm. The intensity of the legal proceedings had softened into a quiet reverence, a pause for humanity in the midst of rules, papers, and authority. Lila sat beside her mother Rachel, her small fingers lightly stroking Max's soft fur. The police dog, trained for vigilance and alertness, had settled into a gentle, almost protective stance, allowing the child to explore her surroundings without fear. The bond was evident to everyone present. Lila's anxiety, once palpable, had begun to ease, replaced with curiosity and the tentative comfort of companionship. Rachel's heart swelled as she watched her daughter. For months, she had worried about this day, fearing that the courthouse's rigid formality would overwhelm Lila. She had imagined endless tears, frightened clinging to her hand, and a child lost in a sea of strangers. Yet here she was, observing a different reality. Lila smiling faintly, her eyes bright and aware, finding solace in the calm presence of Max, the warmth of his fur. The rhythmic rise and fall of his chest created a safe space for a child who had been through too much too soon. The judge, sensing an opportunity to maintain order while honoring the unusual circumstances, called for a brief recess. "We will pause for 10 minutes, Judge Ellis said, her voice measured. "Allow the child some comfort, if necessary." Lila's face brightened slightly, as though recognizing a small victory in the procedural pause. She glanced at Max, who tilted his head toward her, encouraging her to approach. With a shy but determined smile, Lila crawled forward on her small knees, reaching out to stroke the dog's broad shoulders. The courtroom officers moved carefully, giving space while remaining vigilant. Max, sensing the importance of this moment, lowered himself to a near-sitting position, allowing Lila to rest her small arms on his back. The child whispered softly, words only Max could understand, and giggled quietly when the dog responded with a gentle nudge. Rachel's eyes filled with tears, feeling an overwhelming mixture of relief, gratitude, and awe. The small act of touching a dog, something so simple yet profound, had shifted the day's atmosphere entirely. Spectators in the gallery leaned forward, curiosity replacing any lingering boredom or distraction. Some whispered softly, commenting on the unusual scene. A tiny girl comforting a massive police dog while the courtroom's tension seemed to dissolve around them. Even the attorneys, normally so focused on strategy and procedure, observed quietly, taking mental notes that would subtly influence their approach once the hearing resumed. Lila's interaction with Max was no longer just an emotional comfort. It was becoming a living testimony of her resilience and need for stability. Rachel knelt beside Lila, brushing strands of hair from her face and whispering encouragement. "That's right, baby. You're safe. He's here for you." Lila pressed closer to Max, her small hands gripping his fur as though anchoring herself to the only stable thing in the room. The police dog's calm breathing and patient presence reinforced her courage. She had discovered in these fleeting moments that connection and trust could exist even in intimidating spaces filled with authority and strangers. Meanwhile, Dr. Sanders, the child psychologist, quietly observed from the back of the room. She scribbled notes on her clipboard, documenting the child's growing comfort and the therapeutic benefits of the interaction. "The child's body language indicates trust," she murmured softly to herself. "She has shifted from anxious withdrawal to tentative engagement. The dog serves as a stabilizing figure, allowing her to explore the environment safely and express emotion without fear of judgment." Her trained eyes caught every subtle gesture, the way Lila's shoulders relaxed, how her fingers traced Max's fur, the slight upward curve of her lips. Each movement spoke volumes about her emotional state. Lila leaned forward, whispering softly into Max's ear, a series of sounds too quiet for anyone else to hear. The dog responded with a gentle lick on her hand, reinforcing their silent communication. Rachel's chest tightened with emotion, witnessing a bond so profound that words seemed inadequate. The officers who had brought Max into the courtroom nodded subtly to each other, aware that the dog had become more than security. He had become a bridge between trauma and comfort, a living channel of empathy for a child too young to articulate her fears. The judge, watching the interaction, scribbled notes on her legal pad. She recognized the importance of these moments, not merely as a pause in proceedings, but as essential insight into the child's emotional needs. The courtroom, usually a theater of tension and authority, had transformed into a sanctuary of understanding. Even the reporters, quietly observing from the back, lowered their cameras, sensing that this was not a moment to capture for spectacle, but to witness with respect. A small smile appeared on Lila's face, her first genuine expression of serenity that morning. She leaned against Max's side, closing her eyes briefly, as if absorbing the stability he provided. Rachel exhaled slowly, brushing a stray curl from her daughter's face. "That's my brave girl," she whispered, her voice choked with tears. The bond between child and dog had created a ripple effect. Every adult in the room, from judge to deputy, felt the subtle shift in energy, a softening, a recognition that empathy was as critical as evidence in guiding decisions. As the 10-minute recess neared its end, Lila reluctantly pulled her hands from Max's fur. She pressed her cheek briefly against his shoulder, murmuring, "Bye, doggy." Max responded with a gentle nuzzle, a silent promise that he would remain near, a quiet sentinel in the courtroom. Rachel helped Lila back to her seat, brushing her hair and adjusting her dress, but the sense of calm lingered. The child's courage had been bolstered, and the room had been reminded of the profound impact of empathy and connection. When the hearing resumed, the atmosphere was markedly different. The judge called the court to order, but the tension that had dominated the morning had softened. Lawyers approached their arguments with a subtle awareness that their words now carried not just legal weight, but also the responsibility of considering the child's emotional well-being. Witnesses spoke with renewed clarity, understanding that their testimony was now framed not just by facts, but by the human heart. Lila, seated beside Rachel, occasionally glanced at Max, who remained a silent presence near the front of the room. She had learned that courage could be drawn from unexpected places, that stability could be found in the warmth of a dog's fur, and that even in intimidating spaces, connection, and understanding were possible. Rachel watched her daughter, proud and overwhelmed, recognizing that this small, vulnerable child was teaching lessons to everyone present, lessons about empathy, resilience, and the invisible threads that linked beings together. Dr. Sanders made a discreet note. The child's engagement with Max had not only reduced immediate anxiety, but it also allowed Lila to participate more fully in the proceedings. Her body language, her small gestures, and the subtle interactions with the dog provided the courtroom with a living assessment of her needs, beyond what words could convey. The psychologist's observations would later inform recommendations for continued support, ensuring that Lila's emotional well-being remained central to the case's outcome. Rachel whispered to her daughter once more, "You did it, baby. You're strong." Lila smiled faintly, gripping her mother's hand, feeling a sense of safety that had eluded her for months. Max remained close, a silent guardian whose presence had transformed fear into calm, anxiety into courage. The courtroom, witnesses, and participants had all been subtly altered by the simple, profound connection between a child and a dog, an emotional bridge that spoke louder than any argument or document. As proceedings continued, the atmosphere remained soft but attentive. Every adult present seemed to carry a newfound awareness that empathy mattered, that a child's well-being was paramount, and that sometimes the quietest voices, like a 3-year-old's observation or a dog's gentle presence, could guide the most important decisions. Lila's courage and Max's unwavering companionship had broken through the walls of formal authority, leaving the courtroom forever changed. In the moments that followed, Rachel observed her daughter with pride. Lila's cheeks were flushed with excitement, her eyes bright with renewed confidence. Max lay patiently at her side, a living testament to trust, empathy, and silent understanding. The bond they shared had not only comforted the child, but had subtly reshaped the entire courtroom experience, reminding everyone present that even the smallest acts of connection could have extraordinary consequences. The courtroom hummed softly as proceedings resumed, yet the atmosphere had irrevocably changed. Where tension and formality once dominated, there now lingered a quiet sense of awareness, a recognition that the smallest among them, Lila, held an influence far beyond her size. Max, the German shepherd, remained close to her, alert yet calm, a silent guardian in a world that had often felt overwhelming. Each time Lila glanced at him, her face softened, her hands no longer trembling, and her small chest rose and fell with a steadier rhythm. Rachel watched her daughter with a mixture of awe and relief. The months following her husband's death had been a blur of uncertainty, anxiety, and exhaustion. Sleepless nights had given way to long days of worry, trying to anticipate every possible scenario that could affect Lila. Today, though, in the midst of the courtroom's structured order, her daughter had found strength in the most unlikely of allies, a dog whose training for security had expanded into a quiet empathy. Rachel felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She had feared Lila would be swallowed by the formalities of the day. Yet instead, her child had become a quiet hero, guiding the adults around her toward understanding and compassion. Judge Ellis, seated at her bench, observed the interactions with an intensity rarely reserved for a single case. She had presided over countless hearings, but few had unfolded with such subtle emotional complexity. Lila's presence, combined with Max's calm and responsive demeanor, had created a space where human emotion was recognized as crucial to the legal process. We are reminded, she thought, that behind every legal argument, every document, every precedent, there lies a human story, fragile and profound. The opposing attorney, Mr. Reynolds, rose to continue his questioning, but his voice carried a softer tone than before. His gaze occasionally drifted toward the little girl, who sat perched on her mother's lap, her fingers tracing the edge of her stuffed rabbit, while her other hand rested lightly on Max's fur. There was something unspoken in that glance, the realization that any legal strategy must now account for the emotional landscape that Lila represented. The child's presence was no longer merely symbolic, it was pivotal. Rachel leaned down, whispering quietly, "You're doing so well, baby. Just stay close to Max." Lila nodded, her eyes reflecting a newfound focus and courage. She adjusted herself slightly, curling closer to the dog, who responded by nudging her gently with his nose. The subtle gesture reassured her, and she allowed herself to relax further, feeling for the first time that she had a protector she could rely on in this strange, intimidating environment. Dr. Emily Sanders, the court-appointed psychologist, quietly made her way to the front of the courtroom again. Her soft voice carried as she addressed the judge. "Your Honor, I would like to add that the child's response to Max is significant in another way. Lila has not only recognized sadness in the dog, but has also shown the capacity to comfort and regulate his behavior. This indicates remarkable empathy and resilience. In my professional opinion, she benefits greatly from consistent emotional support during these proceedings, which may include continued interaction with familiar figures, including Max." Judge Ellis nodded thoughtfully, absorbing the recommendation. She scribbled a note on her pad, "Child's emotional support central to proceedings." The observation reinforced what she had already seen. Lila's bond with Max was not incidental. It was a critical element in her ability to navigate the pressures of the courtroom. The spectators in the gallery shifted slightly, their whispered comments hushed by the weight of understanding in the room. Some nodded quietly, recognizing the extraordinary situation unfolding before them. A few even wiped small tears from their eyes, moved by the silent heroism of a child who, without words, had taught everyone present a lesson in courage, empathy, and resilience. Rachel felt a surge of protective pride. She had always known her daughter was special, but seeing Lila navigate her grief in this way was beyond anything she had imagined. Months of sleepless nights, worried conversations, and whispered reassurances had culminated in this moment. A child demonstrating bravery that transcended her years, and a dog providing the steady presence that made it possible. As the hearing continued, Lila occasionally leaned forward to stroke Max's fur, her small fingers pressing lightly against his shoulder. Max responded with subtle movements, slight shifts of his body, gentle nudges of his nose that reinforced the bond between them. The child's anxiety diminished, replaced by a cautious but growing confidence. Every glance toward the dog, every whispered word, reinforced her courage and reminded the adults in the room that this was no ordinary case. The opposing attorney attempted to steer the discussion toward standard custody arguments, citing financial stability and living arrangements. Yet the weight of the emotional context, embodied in Lila's presence and Max's silent support, was undeniable. Judge Ellis listened carefully, weighing each word against the subtle cues of the child's emotional state. The law required impartiality, yet today it could not ignore the profound truth. Lila's well-being extended far beyond numbers and documentation. It resided in her feelings, her attachments, and the comfort she found in connection. Rachel whispered softly, "Just a little longer, baby. You're so brave." Lila nodded, pressing her cheek against Max's fur in a fleeting moment of comfort. The dog, trained for protection and alertness, seemed almost to sense the stakes of the day. He shifted slightly, ensuring the child remained close and safe. A quiet sentinel who had become an indispensable part of her support system, Dr. Sanders made another subtle observation, jotting notes on her clipboard. She had watched countless children display resilience, yet few had done so with such profound reliance on a nonverbal partner. Lila's ability to communicate fear, comfort, and empathy through her connection with Max was extraordinary. The psychologist's notes would later highlight This case as an example of how animals can profoundly influence emotional stability in children, particularly those experiencing grief and trauma. The courtroom remained still as Judge Ellis called for a short recess. "We will reconvene in 15 minutes, she announced, her tone gentle yet firm. Lila's eyes brightened slightly at the prospect of a break. She moved closer to Max, wrapping her small arms around his neck in a brief embrace. The dog responded with a low, contented exhale, maintaining the calm that had become Lila's anchor. Rachel watched, heart full, realizing that her daughter's courage had become something more than personal resilience. It was a force that had reshaped the courtroom's energy dot as the adults shuffled to step outside. Lila whispered quietly to Max, "Thank you, doggy." The dog's ears twitched, his gaze softening, and he pressed his massive head gently against her, a silent acknowledgement. Rachel felt a lump in her throat, tears welling as she realized how profoundly these two had supported one another in the most unlikely of settings. The courtroom had become a stage for heroism, not measured in words or deeds, but in empathy, trust, and quiet courage. Even the deputies who had escorted Max in that morning nodded to each other quietly, impressed by the subtle but transformative impact of the child-dog bond. It was rare to witness a case where emotional intelligence, innocence, and animal companionship had shifted the course of proceedings so tangibly. The day's events would leave a lasting impression, not only on the outcome of the hearing, but on everyone who had witnessed them. Rachel held Lila's hand as they walked toward the hallway during the recess. "You're amazing, baby," she whispered. Lila smiled faintly, her small frame relaxing in a way Rachel hadn't seen in months. Max trotted beside them, attentive and steady, as if he understood the significance of the moment. Together, the three of them formed a quiet trio of resilience, trust, and comfort, a living testament to the power of connection in the face of loss and uncertainty. The judge, observing the subtle interactions, reflected on the day's events. Lila, a child no older than 3, had become the center of the courtroom's attention, not through protest or argument, but through her innate ability to convey emotion and receive comfort. Max had responded with precision, gentleness, and empathy, solidifying the importance of considering emotional well-being alongside legal facts. For Judge Ellis, the lesson was clear. Law and humanity must coexist, and the smallest among us can often teach the greatest truths. As the recess drew to a close, Rachel guided Lila back to her seat, Max following closely. The courtroom felt different now, lighter yet charged with quiet awareness. Every participant carried within the lesson of courage, empathy, and the transformative power of silent support. Lila Harper, a 3-year-old girl, and Max, the police dog, had not only navigated the challenges of the day, but had redefined what it meant to be brave, compassionate, and connected in a world that often overlooked the power of the heart. The courtroom had grown unusually quiet as proceedings resumed. Lawyers, witnesses, and deputies all felt the subtle weight of the day's earlier events. Lila sat close to her mother, her small fingers lightly brushing Max's fur, as though drawing courage from the dog's steady presence. Every eye in the room seemed drawn to the quiet trio: the child, the dog, and the mother, who together had transformed the atmosphere from tense formality to a realm of empathy and subtle understanding. Judge Ellis observed the interactions carefully, aware that the child's presence was now inseparable from the case's unfolding. Lila's calm demeanor, bolstered by Max's reassuring presence, had softened even the most hardened courtroom participants. For decades, the judge had presided over cases with precision and authority, yet today, a 3-year-old girl and a dog had subtly but unmistakably redefined the terms of engagement. Rachel whispered softly to her daughter, "You're doing so well, baby. Just stay close to Max." Lila nodded, pressing her cheek gently against the dog's side. Max responded with a quiet exhale, his massive frame a comforting presence that seemed to absorb the child's anxiety. Together, they created a protective bubble, a safe haven in the midst of procedural scrutiny and legal formality. The opposing attorney, Mr. Reynolds, rose again, attempting to continue his line of questioning. Yet this time, his words carried an unusual hesitation. The child's presence, coupled with the psychologist's observations and Max's calm demeanor, had shifted the courtroom's dynamics. Every argument now had to account for the reality of Lila's emotional needs. The lawyer's meticulously prepared points seemed almost secondary to the living proof of vulnerability and resilience in the small child before him. Dr. Sanders, the psychologist, rose to speak once more. Your Honor, I would like to emphasize that Lila's reactions today are significant. She has displayed remarkable composure, emotional intelligence, and resilience. Her interactions with Max demonstrate her need for comfort, stability, and emotional anchoring. Any decision made today should consider not only her physical welfare, but also her psychological well-being. This child's emotional development and healing are directly influenced by the presence of supportive figures, including her mother, and in this instance, the police dog. Judge Ellis nodded thoughtfully, her gaze moving from Dr. Sanders to the child. She saw Lila's small frame perched on the edge of her seat, her fingers lightly entwined with Max's fur, eyes bright and alert, but tinged with the vulnerability of a child who had endured too much. The judge's mind raced, weighing the legal precedents against the raw truth in front of her. This child's emotional needs could not be abstracted into statistics or documents. They had to be acknowledged as part of the court's decision-making process. Rachel's hand squeezed Lila's gently. You're brave, baby, she whispered. Lila leaned closer to Max, murmuring softly, Doggy? Here. The dog's response was a subtle tilt of the head, a gentle exhale, as if acknowledging her courage and silently promising continued protection. The small act, barely perceptible, carried a profound weight that resonated throughout the courtroom. Every adult present felt the emotional gravity, a reminder that justice extended beyond procedure to encompass compassion and understanding. Mr. Reynolds attempted to resume questioning, this time addressing Lila directly. Sweetheart, he began carefully, can you tell us what makes you feel safe? Lila's eyes flicked up briefly at her mother, who nodded encouragingly. Doggy. Safe, the child whispered, her voice barely audible, yet carrying absolute conviction. The courtroom collectively leaned in, absorbing the simplicity and power of her words. In 3 tiny syllables, Lila had conveyed a truth that no argument or legal citation could replicate. Her sense of security, her anchor in the midst of uncertainty, rested with Max. A ripple of understanding spread through the courtroom. Witnesses adjusted in their seats, deputies shifted their stance, and even the judge allowed herself a reflective pause. The small child had, in her own way, taken control of the narrative, revealing the profound intersection between emotional security and legal responsibility. Lila's words were simple, yet they carried a message that could not be ignored. The child's well-being depended on more than custody arrangements or financial considerations. It depended on her capacity to feel safe, understood, and supported. Rachel fought to maintain her composure, her chest tight with a mixture of pride and relief. Months of fear, sleepless nights, and constant worry had led to this moment, where her daughter's innocence and insight had transformed the courtroom into a space of empathy and reflection. She whispered once more, You're amazing, baby. Layla's small smile, tentative yet genuine, was her reply, a silent acknowledgement that she had found her voice, her courage, and her anchor. Max, sensing the shift, lowered his head slightly and allowed Lila to rest her small hand on his nose. The gesture, though subtle, symbolized trust, reassurance, and a mutual understanding that extended beyond human language. The courtroom remained silent, each adult present recognizing the quiet heroism of a child who, through empathy and courage, had reshaped the day's proceedings. Judge Ellis, after a measured pause, called the attorneys to a side conference. Her voice was calm but firm. We must consider the child's emotional needs in every decision. The presence of supportive figures, including her mother and trusted companions like Max, is not a luxury, it is essential. The court's responsibility extends beyond legal formalities. It encompasses the child's emotional development and well-being. The attorneys nodded, absorbing the weight of her directive. Even Mr. Reynolds' usually confident demeanor showed signs of reflection and acknowledgement. The recess ended, and the hearing resumed with a renewed sense of focus. Every argument, every statement, was now framed not solely in legal terms, but through the lens of Lila's emotional needs. The child's presence had shifted the courtroom's dynamics so profoundly that strategy and protocol had to be tempered with compassion. Witnesses spoke more gently, lawyers phrased questions with subtle care, and deputies maintained a watchful yet unobtrusive presence. Rachel held Lila's hand firmly as the proceedings continued. The child leaned closer to Max, drawing strength from the dog's calm presence. She whispered softly, "Doggy, stay." Max responded with a quiet exhale and a subtle shift of his massive body, keeping her secure. In this shared understanding, the two had created an unspoken language, a dialogue of trust and reassurance that permeated the courtroom. As the day wore on, Judge Ellis noted the transformation in the courtroom's energy. Lila had become not just a participant, but an active influence, her small voice and the dog's silent support shaping the proceedings in ways that no one had anticipated. The judge's pen moved steadily across her notes, recording observations about the child's resilience, her emotional needs, and the undeniable impact of the bond with Max. Finally, after hours of testimony, questioning, and reflection, Judge Ellis called the court to order for closing statements. She addressed the child gently, her voice carrying warmth. "Lila, you have shown great courage today. Your voice has been heard, and your feelings matter." The little girl's eyes widened slightly, a mixture of pride and relief crossing her face. She pressed her small hand to Max's fur, murmuring softly, "Thank you, Doggy." The courtroom felt the weight of the moment, the child's courage, the loyalty of a silent companion, and the quiet triumph of empathy over procedure. Rachel exhaled, tears streaming down her cheeks. Months of fear, grief, and uncertainty had led to this pivotal moment. Her daughter had not only faced the intimidating world of the courtroom, but had transformed it through courage, insight, and the support of a loyal dog. Max remained steadfast by her side, his calm presence a living testament to the power of connection, trust, and empathy. Judge Ellis finally stood, her tone both solemn and compassionate. This court recognizes the unique circumstances of this case. The child's well-being, her need for emotional stability, and her demonstrated courage will guide our considerations. Today, we have witnessed not only legal proceedings, but an extraordinary display of empathy, resilience, and the profound impact of human-animal connection. This court acknowledges the lessons taught by a small child and a loyal companion, and we will take them to heart in reaching our decision. The courtroom, once dominated by legal arguments and procedural focus, had been irrevocably transformed. Every adult present recognized the quiet heroism of Lila, the steadfast loyalty of Max, and the enduring lesson that courage, empathy, and connection can reshape even the most formal of spaces. Rachel held her daughter close, whispering softly, "You did it, baby. You've shown them all how strong you are." Lila smiled faintly, resting against Max, her small frame filled with a newfound sense of safety and accomplishment. The courtroom fell into a hushed silence, as Judge Ellis prepared to deliver her final ruling. Every person present, attorneys, deputies, court staff, and spectators waited, aware that the day had been unlike any other in their professional experience. Lila sat quietly beside her mother, her small fingers intertwined with Max's fur, drawing strength and reassurance from the dog's calm presence. She was no longer just a witness. She had become a guiding force, a silent hero whose courage had shaped the entire courtroom. Rachel held her daughter tightly, sensing the weight of the moment. For months, fear, grief, and uncertainty had consumed their lives. The sudden loss of her husband had left both mother and child adrift, struggling to find stability. Yet here, in a place dominated by authority and procedure, they had discovered something extraordinary. A child's instinctive empathy and a loyal dog's quiet presence had forged a bond strong enough to transform an entire room, reminding everyone present of the power of connection, trust, and love. Judge Ellis cleared her throat, her expression solemn yet compassionate. After careful consideration, she began, "This court acknowledges the unique and compelling circumstances presented today. Lila Harper's emotional well-being is paramount. The bond she shares with her mother and with her canine companion, Max, has been demonstrated as essential to her sense of safety and stability. In recognition of these factors, this court will issue an order that prioritizes the child's emotional and psychological health, ensuring continuity of care and support during and after these proceedings." The words resonated through the courtroom. Rachel felt a surge of relief, her body relaxing as the tension she had carried for months began to dissipate. Lila, too, seemed to sense the shift, leaning closer to Max and resting her small head against his warm fur. The dog responded with a gentle nudge, as if acknowledging the victory, not only for the child, but for the bond that had carried them both through such a trying day. Judge Ellis continued, her voice carrying a rare warmth. "This ruling does not only concern legal arrangements or custody considerations. It is a recognition of human empathy, the profound understanding that even the youngest among us can teach important lessons about resilience, courage, and the importance of emotional security. Lila Harper has shown remarkable strength, and her connection with Max exemplifies the vital role that compassion and support play in the lives of those facing trauma." Rachel's eyes filled with tears, her hand gripping her daughter's, as though to anchor herself in the moment. "You see, baby," she whispered, "they understand you. You've shown them how brave you are." Lila smiled faintly, the shy curve of her lips revealing the satisfaction of a child who had been heard, valued, and understood. She pressed her small cheek against Max's shoulder, feeling the warmth and steady presence that had been her anchor throughout the long and intimidating proceedings. The courtroom officers, who had spent the day focused on security and procedure, now observed quietly, moved by the extraordinary bond they had witnessed. Max had been more than a dog. He had been a bridge between fear and comfort, between grief and resilience. His patient presence had allowed Lila to navigate the courtroom with courage, far beyond her years. Even the opposing attorney, Mr. Reynolds, lowered his eyes briefly, acknowledging silently that today's proceedings had transcended legal argumentation, becoming a testament to empathy, understanding, and the quiet power of connection. Dr. Sanders, seated at the back, smiled subtly to herself. In her career, she had rarely witnessed such a profound interaction between a child and an animal in a formal setting. Lila's ability to express grief, recognize emotion, and seek comfort in a non-verbal companion was extraordinary. A psychologist's notes would later highlight this day as a landmark example of how emotional support and animal companionship can play an essential role in a child's development, especially in the face of trauma. As the judge concluded her statement, a gentle murmur of approval swept through the courtroom. Spectators shifted in their seats, some wiping away quiet tears. others nodding in recognition of the extraordinary moment they had witnessed. It was not a moment of drama or spectacle. It was a moment of humanity, a demonstration of courage, resilience, and the unspoken truth that the bonds we form, especially in moments of vulnerability, can transform lives in ways that formal structures alone cannot. Rachel leaned down and whispered once more to Lila, "You've done it, baby. You've shown them all how strong you are." Lila's small hand pressed against her mother's cheek, a gesture of love and reassurance. She glanced up at Max, who sat patiently beside them, eyes soft yet vigilant. The dog had been a silent partner in this journey, his calm presence allowing the child to face a daunting environment with courage and composure. As the courtroom began to clear, Judge Ellis offered a final remark. May today serve as a reminder to all present that empathy, understanding, and emotional support are as crucial to justice as law itself. Leela Harper and her canine companion have shown us all that courage can come in small packages, and that the quiet bonds we form may be the most powerful forces in the world. The words echoed softly, a gentle affirmation that would linger long after the gavel had fallen. Outside the courtroom, the air felt different, lighter, almost celebratory. Rachel held Lila's hand tightly as they approached Max, who wagged his tail slowly, sensing the shift from tension to relief. The bond between child and dog had been a lifeline, and now it was validated, recognized, and respected by everyone who had witnessed it. The three of them walked together, a small but unbreakable unit, strengthened by the day's challenges and triumphs. Rachel knelt beside Lila, holding her daughter close. "You were amazing today, baby," she whispered, tears of pride glistening in her eyes. Leela smiled faintly, leaning into the warmth of both her mother and Max. The dog nudged her gently, offering comfort and affirmation, a silent promise that he would always be there. In that moment, the trio had not only survived an intimidating day, they had emerged stronger, connected, and profoundly understood. The journey ahead would still have challenges. Grief, adjustment, and daily life awaited them. Yet the events of the courtroom had created a foundation built on empathy, trust, and mutual support. Lila had learned that her feelings mattered, that courage could take many forms, and that she could rely on both her mother and her loyal companion to navigate the world's uncertainties. Max had shown that quiet presence, patience, and understanding could be transformative, bridging gaps that words often could not. Rachel looked down at her daughter and Max, overwhelmed by the depth of the bond they had formed. It was more than companionship. It was a lifeline, a source of courage, and a testament to the resilience of both child and animal. Lila's laughter, small but genuine, filled the space between them, a sound that spoke of relief, trust, and newfound confidence. Max responded with a low, contented sigh, resting his head near Lila's tiny hands, anchoring her in a world that had once felt overwhelming. The day's events would linger in memory for all who had witnessed them. Judge Ellis, the attorneys, the deputies, and the spectators had observed a rare and beautiful lesson, that bravery, empathy, and connection often reside where we least expect them, in the quiet courage of a child and the unwavering loyalty of a dog. Lila Harper's small voice had spoken louder than legal arguments. Her bond with Max had taught lessons that no document could convey. As Rachel, Lila, and Max left the courthouse together, a sense of peace settled over them. They had faced fear, grief, and uncertainty, and had emerged stronger. The courtroom, once intimidating and formal, had become a place of profound understanding, forever shaped by the courage of a small girl and the loyalty of a police dog. Their journey was far from over, but today had proven something remarkable. Love, empathy, and the quiet bonds we form can guide us through even the most challenging trials. Walking down the courthouse steps, Rachel held Lila's hand tightly, while Max remained close, vigilant yet calm. The world outside awaited, but inside them burned a sense of triumph, resilience, and connection that would endure. For a 3-year-old girl, her mother, and a loyal police dog, this day had become a testament to courage, emotional intelligence, and the transformative power of bonds built on trust, love, and understanding. In the days, weeks, and years to come, Lila would face challenges, experience joy and sadness, and grow into a remarkable young individual. But the lessons of this day, the importance of empathy, the strength found in connection, and the courage discovered in vulnerability, would remain with her forever. Max, her silent guardian, would continue to be her anchor, their bond unbreakable, a living testament to the extraordinary ways in which love and loyalty can heal even the deepest wounds. And so, as they disappeared into the sunlight outside the courthouse, the trio moved forward together, 3 hearts forever intertwined by trust, courage, and the quiet heroism of a 3-year-old girl who had walked into a courtroom, seen a police dog, and in doing so, shown the world the true power of empathy.